Step into the time machine. Let's travel through the past. Mr. Gold's gonna take you on a history blast. From ancient civilizations to the world wars. Get ready, hold tight.
Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the counterculture movement and then how that counterculture movement played a role in American society and sort of shaped who we are today and was caused by where we came from. So it's going to be sort of the significance and the history and then how it relates to our lives today. That's our essential question. How is the counterculture movement of the 20th century significant to U.S. history? And consider like beatniks, hippies, and then the anti-war protesters. And at the time of recording this video, there's actually some anti-war protests going on in the U.S. now. There's hundreds of college campuses have had protests against the Israel-Hamas war. So still going on. History repeats itself. So every time that happens, history teachers kind of smile a little bit, because not because we like war or anything, but because we love when what we're studying connects and can help our lives today. So, introduction to the anti-war and counterculture movement. After World War II, there was a baby boom. Demographically, that just means there was a huge increase in the amount of babies that were being born. And these babies being born en masse are going to have different cultures and different values than their parents. They're going to have different views on things such as civil rights, feminism, the LGBTQ movement, environmentalism. Just think about whoever is watching this. Think about you and your parents. You might be buddy. You might have like that cool mom that'll go out to like Starbucks with you or whatever and listen to the same kind of music, things like that. But at this time, it wasn't like that. The kids were listening to rock and roll, and the parents were listening to like the ragtime 1930s music, 20s music, things like that. And rock and roll really shook how families viewed music. Parents thought, they like, turn that stuff off, that's not real music. Look at how they're dancing, yada yada. And the kids were like, oh, don't talk to my favorite band like that, Mom. They're cool. The Beatles are cool. So that brought this whole generation gap and this clash between what was acceptable entertainment and what were family values and what was not. Artists like Allen Ginsberg and Ken Kesey, Neil Cassidy, Jack Kerouac were all famous at this time for how they wrote. They really explored like freedom and humanism and authentic stories. And sorry, I want to just fix that typo before it irritates me. Just like traveling around America, they explored those type of things of like leaving home and seeing new things. Here's a graph of the baby boom. So if you see the red line, orange line, red line, from the late 30s, early 40s here, till about 1965, these are the number of births in the United States. So it really jumped. There was a huge increase in the birth rate. So the rise of the hippie movement and what it entails. The hippie movement was a diverse array of cultures. It wasn't just one monolith. There was writers that influenced it. There was musicians. There was film and poetry and protesting and all that stuff. So there was a lot of things that kind of boiled together into this hippie movement. So yeah, it was a mix of Eastern philosophies as well. So like Buddhism, pacifism, collectivism, all those ideals came. Communism, there's like starting communes and hippie communities, things like that were all being incorporated into these discussions. In the early 1960s, the civil rights movement was escalating as well. So you had people who were opposed to racism, people who were opposed to the Vietnam War, all coming together. And they increasingly questioned the traditional values of America. Like, they wanted to see, like, do we have to be a wartime country? Do we have to stick our nose in other countries' affairs and fight and send people to draft and die? Or can we be peaceful? Can we just enjoy music and get out of all the military-industrial complex entanglements that we have? It gained significant attention during 1967, and they call it the Summer of Love, and it was really focused around Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, the Haight-Ashbury district. This is where a lot of the famous music was being performed, and people just gravitated there. They would take buses, planes, trains, cars, however they could get there, and just come out and enjoy the Summer of Love, as they called it. Some of the artists, the famous artists that were associated with this location, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, they were all also performing at Woodstock, which had over 400,000 fans that showed up to the festival. And then it was so nice, they did it twice. They did another Woodstock in the 90s, 50 years later. So it was a good time for music and just people to express themselves and break away from traditional society. Some of the philosophies, peace, love, happiness, went in opposition of the Vietnam War, because to have a successful war, you really need to hate your enemy. You have to want to kill and fight. So the ideas of peace and love were counterculture to the narrative of like Johnson and Nixon and all the generals of like, oh, we need to go and kill as many as we can and have high body counts and all that. So when you hear like why, the question comes up all the time, like, why is love and peace and happiness counterculture, and why isn't it just mainstream? Well, if you have a military industrial complex that sustains itself on having a strong military and having well-trained soldiers and being ready to fight at any time, you don't want to have their guard lowered by having peace and love and happiness all the time. So that's kind of how the counterculture fits in there. One of the major phrases that came about at this time was tune in, turn on, and drop out. And people began to use psychedelic drugs such as LSD, marijuana, and other pills and things that they could just find that would help them hallucinate. And that kind of fostered a sense of unity among those people who were doing that. And they developed communities around those experiences. So the backlash, some of the backlashes that happened. First, the Kent State Massacre. At the time of this recording, there's like college protests going on, as I mentioned before, but this one was similar to the ones going on in 2024, except for the National Guard came in and quickly dispersed the protest. And as some of the protesters were running away, the guards began to fire and killed 4 of the students, injured 9 of them. So that's why it's known as the Kent State Massacre, because these kids weren't fighting. One of them was like a speech and language student, and then I forget the career of the other one, but these were like nonviolent kids. So it was just a massacre. And then the Jackson State Massacre. In this situation, students were protesting for civil rights in a dormitory, and law enforcement opened fire. They shot 460 shots into the dormitory, killed 2 and injured 12. So that's why it's also called a massacre, because these kids weren't shooting back. Eventually someone claimed that they saw a kid with a gun, but they weren't really holding a gun, so it was just a massacre. And then you have the Hard Hat Riot of 1970, where construction workers started beating up protesters. And then another form of backlash, Nixon passed the 1970 Controlled Substance Act, which still hangs around to this day. And he started the war on drugs and the scheduling of drugs from like Schedule 1 to Schedule 5 based on if they have medical uses or not. So he thought if you control the drugs, you can kind of control the hippies and keep them off the streets, keep the drugs from happening on the streets and stuff like that. And then also Operation Chaos by the CIA. My video is running kind of long, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but their goal was to undermine the protests and sabotage the protest. Here's some photos from Woodstock. You can see Jimi Hendrix, Jerry Garcia, and some of the attendees of the festival and how they looked. Let me go back. Look at the hair. Look at the hair. You can just tell by the styles that they have, like, these guys are not worried about a 9-to-5 job. Very chill people. So that sort of embodies the attitude that they had at that time. The legacy of the 1960s counterculture can still be seen today in artists like the Grateful Dead, like the anti-war protests that are happening on college campuses. They're even happening in like the same dorms and the same locations that the 60s protests happened in. Music festivals, especially like during summertime and spring, you can see lots of music festivals that go on for 3-4 days. The psychedelics being used by young people, fashion that emphasizes many different colors and like Native American style clothing is the thing that was carried over. Like really loose shirts, long hair, headbands, environmentalism, peace and love, things like that. When you see peace signs, those are a piece of this legacy. Like hemp necklaces and that kind of jewelry, still legacy from these times. So it's around if you look for it. And especially in the forms of protest and like protest music, the legacy is still going strong. So I hope this helps you understand the essential questions and the competencies for this unit. And I hope you guys have a good day. Take care.
Step into the time machine. Let's travel through the past. Mr. Gold's gonna take you on a history blast from ancient